The article we're interested in is Albert Pike, Debit or Credit. It's written by C. Fred Kleinknecht, who's the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. It starts on page 4 and it runs through page 6. We read at the top of page 4, I recently heard an outspoken Scottish Rite brother refer to Albert Pike as a debit to our order. Pike, he asserted, in no way benefits the contemporary Scottish Rite. In contrast, Pike's epic work, Morals and Dogma, he thinks, weakens our every Masonic action and causes members to leave our ranks. Sadly, on the surface at least, he is right. Anti-Masonic writers, especially fundamentalists of every stripe, delight in pulling quotations out of context from Morals and Dogma. The first Masonic tactic we see here is to claim that the quotes are taken out of context. This is a very common tactic. The problem of taking something out of context is that the meaning can be misunderstood when writing is not shown in its surroundings. But really, to examine the full context of something, you often have to consider not only the immediate surroundings, but other chapters of a book as well. Sometimes you have to examine other books written by the author, and often books written by his contemporaries, and possibly even examine historical writings. For example, in order to fully understand a given passage in the book of Luke, you have to read it in the context of the verses before and after it. You also have to consider the previous and following chapters. You might have to refer to one of the other gospel accounts or the book of Acts to get the full picture. You might have to refer to the Old Testament prophets also. Often we were able to take a passage out of its surroundings and the meaning does not change. It is still taken out of context, but it is not a problem. The claim that something is taken out of context often is meant to imply that the person who used the quote is trying to intentionally deceive. Let's examine this article written by Fred Kleinknecht in context. Fred is the highest-ranking member of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite. On the bottom of page 4, we see his photograph, and I'm going to zoom in on that so you can get a little better look at his headdress. Can you see the emblem on his head covering? It has a series of vertical and horizontal lines on it. Now we will see a better picture of Fred later on. This is page 6 of the same article, Albert Pike, Debit or Credit, and here's a second tactic which is demonstrated. It must be understood that Morals and Dogma is an expression of Pike's personal opinions. The book does not represent official Scottish Rite philosophy. The tactic is simply to state that the book expresses the opinion of the writer only. We don't believe or hold to those things. That book is not authoritative, and that man is generally not accepted as an authority on Freemasonry. Now let's look at the context. Down at the bottom we read, correctly understood, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma provides our brethren a stimulus to thought, a source of inspiration, and even an aid to Scottish Rite growth. Pike's great work is not the book of an hour, a decade, or a century. It is a book for all time. Abandon Morals and Dogma? Never. The book disclaimed is often the most useful after all. So we see that Fred is talking out of both sides of his mouth here. The Scottish Rite will never abandon Morals and Dogma. We saw on the title page that Morals and Dogma was published by the authority of the 33rd degree. Let's continue looking at the context. Notice the symbol to the left of Fred's signature? That is the same symbol which he wears on his headpiece. It is known as the signal of Baphomet or Baphomet. We will come back to this element of context later when we introduce Baphomet. Looking at the top of the page again, notice that Fred says, the book does not represent official Scottish Rite philosophy. This is the title page of a book called A Bridge to Light, written by Rex Hutchins. And we notice that the foreword is written by C. Fred Kleinknecht, the Sovereign Grand Commander, and it's published by the Supreme Council of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, in 1988. Well, let's see what Fred writes in the foreword. Fred writes, "The apex of our teachings has been the rituals of our degrees and morals and dogma written by our beloved Sovereign Grand Commander Albert Pike." Now, just a moment ago, I showed Kleinknecht writing that the book does not represent official Scottish Rite philosophy when he was speaking of morals and dogma. So here's another Masonic tactic. They lie. There is ample evidence at this time to support the following. The Masonic Lodge is not a social organization. The Masonic Lodge has a plan of salvation. The Masonic Lodge has a secret doctrine, and we cannot understand Freemasonry without understanding the secret doctrine. What is the Masonic plan of salvation, and how does it tie into the secret doctrine? We previously learned from the Indiana Monitor that the legend of the third degree was the most important symbol of Freemasonry, and we need to understand it before we can have a complete understanding of the secret doctrine. The lost word and the rediscovery of it is a central theme in Masonic ritual. The setting for the legend is the building of Solomon's temple just before completion. For working on the temple, the workmen are to receive the secrets of a master mason, which will entitle them to the wages of a master. 3 of the men cannot wait to obtain the secrets. During the ritual of the third degree, each man is required to portray Hiram Abiff. Hiram is accosted by 3 ruffians, Jubala, Jubalo, and Jubalum, who are demanding that he reveal to them the secrets of a master mason. Hiram is a righteous individual. He will not reveal the secrets to them until the proper time and place, and then only in the presence of Hiram, king of Tyre, and Solomon, king of Israel. The first ruffian fails to get the word from Hiram Abiff. The second ruffian demands, "Give me the master's word, or I will take your life in a moment." The third ruffian actually does take the life of Hiram. He is unjustly murdered. When he died, the word was lost because it could not be mentioned except in the presence of the 2 Hirams and Solomon. Hiram Abiff is then buried. After the grave is located and the body confirmed to be that of the Grand Master, Hiram Abiff, King Solomon, who's portrayed by the worshipful master, declares that the master's word has been lost. He declares that the first word spoken after the body is raised will be adopted for the regulation of the master's lodges until future generations shall find the right word. Hiram Abiff is then raised from the dead by the strong grip of the lion's paw of the tribe of Judah. Jesus is the lion of the tribe of Judah. The first word spoken by Hiram Abiff after being raised from the dead was Mahabone. That is the substitute for the lost word. Hiram Abiff is a righteous individual who is unjustly murdered, buried, and then raised from the dead. Look at the way Hiram is laying. He has his arms outstretched and his palms up. Notice the crown from his head. What is the meaning of this ritual? Could this be a mockery of the death, the burial, and resurrection of our Lord and Savior? Remember, this is the most important symbol of Freemasonry, is the legend of the third degree. This small book is called The Master Mason. It's a training material for the Lodge. It says at the top, "For the Candidate," and it's book number 4 in a series. The first 3 books are called On the Threshold. Now, I've got a copy of this book that's published by the Indiana Grand Lodge, and also another one that's published by the authority of the North Carolina Grand Lodge. So this book is used widely. It's not just used by one state. This is the title page for the Master Mason, and we can see, in fact, it is authorized by the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Indiana. Now, this makes it an authoritative book in the state of Indiana. It's compiled by the Committee on Masonic Education. This is the foreword, which begins on page 2. It is safe to say that among the countless thousands who have in the past been raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason, no one of them realized at the time the full implications of the ceremony. This clearly would be impossible. Yet it is vitally important that the deeper meanings of this degree be understood if one is to become a Master Mason, in fact, as well as in name. Now they're saying here that a man cannot be a Master Mason in fact until he understands the deeper meanings of this ritual, or this degree. Now how would you find out the deeper meanings? Well, they reveal that the literature of Masonry in all its many phases is within your reach, and your worshipful master or secretary can give you particulars. Picking it up again on page 3 in the center of the page, we read, master or secretary can give you particulars. Picking it up again on page 3 in the center of the page, we read, your enjoyment of Freemasonry, its value to you in your future life, your contribution to the fulfillment of its great mission will be in direct proportion to your understanding of its secrets, which, if you will recall the degree through which you have just passed, you do not yet have, and which can only be gained by your own endeavors and the assistance of your brethren. Now, which brethren would they turn to for assistance? At the bottom of the page, they write again, much has been written about Freemasonry. Probably your own lodge possesses a library of books telling of the history of Freemasonry and treating of its philosophy, symbolism, and jurisprudence. These books are at your disposal at all times, and there are many others that you may purchase for study in your own home. There are also many magazines on the subject. So over and over and over again we see the Grand Lodges pointing the newly raised Master Mason to the Masonic library or into the Masonic books to find out the meaning of the rituals that they've gone through. Mystic Masonry by J.D. Buck contains a good explanation of the meaning of the legend of the third degree. It was written by another of the medical doctors who happened to be respected Masonic authorities. This book was written before the turn of the century, and it is still in print today. It would not be in print if Masons were not buying it and reading it. Here is a portrait of Dr. Buck. This is the title page. There's another title that this book also goes by, Symbolism of Freemasonry, but the more common title is Mystic Masonry. And we see that it was written by J.D. Buck, who was 32nd degree. We're going to run into the Greek word Christos, which means anointed. It's the word that's used for Christ in the New Testament manuscripts. On page 133, we read about the meaning of the third degree ritual. In the third degree, the candidate impersonates Hiram, who has been shown to be identical with the Christos of the Greeks and with the sun gods of all other nations. The superiority of Masonry at this point over all exoteric religions consists in this. All these religions take the symbol for the thing symbolized. Christ was originally like the Father. Now he is made identical with the Father. In deifying Jesus, the whole of humanity is bereft of Christos as an eternal potency within every human soul, a latent Christ in every man. In thus deifying one man, they have orphaned the whole of humanity. On the other hand, Masonry, in making every candidate personify Hiram, has preserved the original teaching, which is the universal glyphic. Few candidates may be aware that Hiram, whom they have represented and personified, is ideally and precisely the same as Christ. Yet this is undoubtedly the case. Now I can hear it now. The Masons are going to deny that this is an accurate interpretation of the legend of the third degree. They're going to say that that man does not speak for Masonry. That's his own personal opinion. So let's take a look at a monitor and see if we can find one that agrees with that interpretation. This is the Kentucky Monitor. The preface is the Spirit of Masonry. We can see in the underlined text that it is in fact the Kentucky Monitor. Now I'm going to show you some text that's on page XIV. The word is all at the bottom. That's the only word that I'm going to read. Then we'll move up to the top of the next page. All believed in a future life to be attained by purification and trials, in a state or successive states of reward and punishment, and in a mediator or redeemer by whom the evil principle was to be overcome and the supreme deity reconciled to his creatures. The belief was general that he was to be born of a virgin and suffer a painful death. The Hindus called him Krishna, the Chinese, some other word, the Persians, some other word, the Chaldeans, some other word, the Egyptians, Horus, Plato, Love, the Scandinavians, Balter, the Christians, Jesus, Masons, Hiram. It is interesting that the small hill west of Mount Moriah has been identified as Golgotha, or Mount Calvary. So here clearly we see in a Masonic monitor from the state of Kentucky that the Lodge considers Hiram Abiff to be equal with Jesus Christ. So Buck's opinion is in fact supported by the Grand Lodge of Kentucky, apparently. This is page 57 of Mystic Masonry. Let's find out just a bit more about the legend of the third degree. Buck writes, every soul must work out its own salvation and take the kingdom of heaven by force. Salvation by faith and the vicarious atonement were not taught as now interpreted by Jesus, nor are these doctrines taught in the exoteric scriptures. They are latter and ignorant perversions of the original doctrines. In the early churches, in the secret doctrine, there was not one Christ for the whole world, but a potential Christ in every man. On page 62, Buck writes, it is far more important that men should strive to become Christs than that they should believe that Jesus was Christ. If the Christ state can be attained but by one human being during the whole evolution of the race, then the evolution of man is a farce and human imperfection an impossibility. But what did Jesus say? Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Peter clearly understood this. In Acts 4:10 we find, be it known unto you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom ye crucified, whom God raised from the dead, even by him doth this man stand before you whole. This is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which has become the head of the corner. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. We need to learn some terminology in order to understand the writings of Masonic authors. Notice that the word Christ has been redefined. It no longer refers to the Messiah, but to a state or condition which each Mason can attain. Three more terms: cosmic consciousness, Christ consciousness, and possession of the lost word. All three terms imply that the individual has attained the same state, the Christ state, wherein he has worked out his own salvation. We already know that the meaning of the symbol of the legend of the third degree is that the Mason has been redeemed from the death of sin. We shall see that the possession of the lost word is the key to the Masonic plan of salvation. This is page 49 in Clymer's The Mysticism of Masonry. He writes, after the candidate is obligated and brought to light in the third degree, he is bantered with the statement that undoubtedly he now imagines himself a Master Mason. He is informed not only that such is not the case, but there is no certainty that he will ever become such. He subsequently starts on his journey for the discovery of the lost word. On page 55, Clymer writes, every man who takes upon himself the Masonic obligation can, if he will, find this lost word. The material required in the process of transmutation is within himself as surely as a man who has his cellar filled with coal and a furnace wherein to burn it has all that is required to start a roaring fire which will heat his house. Finding the lost word is an individual work. Each soul must accomplish it or miss immortality, and this is true whether a man be a churchman or a Mason or both. Ancient Mysteries in Modern Masonry by the Reverend Charles H. Vail. Here's the title page, and we see that Vail was the pastor of Pullman Memorial Church at Albion, New York. This book was published in 1909, and it was published by McCoy, the leading Masonic publisher. Here is a photograph of the Reverend Vail. Vail writes on page 211, "The symbol of the lost word and the legend for the search of it embodies the whole design of Freemasonry. The primary object of Freemasonry is the search after divine truth. The word is a symbol of this divine truth, and this truth is the key to the science of the soul." Manly Palmer Hall wrote about the lost word in The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. This is page 59. He writes, "The word is found when the master himself is ordained by the living hand of God, cleansed by living water, baptized by living fire, a priest-king after the order of Melchizedek, who is above the law. This is another way of stating that the Master Mason becomes a Christ when the lost word is found. The Melchizedek priesthood is the priesthood of Jesus Christ." This drawing is between pages 52 and 53 of The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. The caption under it reads, "In this picture is concealed the allegory of the lost word. The Master Mason becomes the capstone of the universal temple." Let's take a look at the drawing. The Master Mason becomes the capstone of the universal temple in the manner that Christ is the head of the church. How is the lost word found? That is the secret behind the secret doctrine. We have some more terminology to learn. Initiation, evolution, divine science, science of soul development, and soul architecture all refer to the same salvation process through which a Mason reaches the Christ state. Initiation is the most commonly used word, but evolution is also used often. I will point out some of these words and phrases in the various texts when we run across them. Recall that possession of the lost word had the same meaning as having attained the Christ state. What is the significance of initiation? H.L. Haywood wrote about the significance of initiation in the chapter titled "The Meaning of Initiation and Secrecy in the Great Teachings of Masonry." He writes on page 31, "Masonic initiation is intended to be quite as profound and revolutionizing an experience. As a result of it, the candidate should become a new man. He should have a new range of thought, a new feeling about mankind, a new idea about God, a new confidence in immortality." His statement is quite accurate. After we have become fully aware of the secret doctrine, that statement will be understood to have a ponderous meaning. Again, we are being limited by our paradigms. We will come back to it. This is the bottom of page 85 of Mystic Masonry. Buck writes, "Becoming perfect in humanity, man attains divinity. In other words, he becomes Christos. Remember that Christos is the Greek word for Christ." Now we'll go to the top of the next page. This is the meaning, aim, and consummation of human evolution. And this philosophy defines the one only process by which it may be attained. The perfect man is Christ, and Christ is God. This is the birthright and destiny of every human soul. Notice that evolution, a term which was previously defined, does indeed refer to the process by which a man is said to become a Christ. Masonry teaches that each man can become Christ and therefore God. Did you ever wonder where the Mormons got the idea that they could become gods? Well, Joseph Smith was a Mason. Now, some Masons would like to claim that this is just Buck's personal opinion, that it is not Masonic doctrine accurately, and that no leading Masonic authority would put forth such an idea. But let me show you something in the Kentucky Monitor. This is the preface to the Kentucky Monitor, The Spirit of Masonry, page XX. And we notice down close to the bottom, "God becomes man that man may become God." So it is accurate Masonic teaching that man may become God. That's the monitor which is used in the state of Kentucky. It's given to each and every man that's raised to Master Mason there. This is page 86 of Mystic Masonry in the center. And Buck writes, "All real initiation is an internal, not an external process. It is thus that man must work out his own salvation. The consummation of initiation is the perfect master, the Christos, for these are the same. They are the goal, the perfect consummation of human evolution. In this passage, we see that initiation is also used to define the process of becoming a Christ. This is the Masonic initiation. The discipline of initiation is discussed in detail in the Masonic initiation, which was written by W.L. Wilmshurst. This is page 17. And Wilmshurst writes, "It may be a surprise to some members of our craft to be told that our ceremonial rites, as at present performed, do not constitute or confer real initiation at all in the original sense of admitting a man to the solemn mysteries of the human soul and to practical experience in divine science. We profess to confer initiation, but few Masons know what real initiation involves. Very few, one fears, would have the wish, the courage, or the willingness to make the necessary sacrifices to attain it if they did." The meaning of the last sentence in the above quote is profound. We will come back to it also. This is page 19 of the meaning of initiation. Wilmshurst continues, "For real initiation means an expansion of consciousness from the human to the divine level." This is Ancient Mysteries in Modern Masonry, page 141. The chapter is titled The Meaning of True Initiation. Vail writes, "Thus studying the inner teachings of the mysteries, we see that Christ is not a unique personage, but the first fruits, the promise of man made perfect. The initiate has ever been thus regarded, for to attain the Christ state is salvation." Further down we read, "Every man is a potential Christ, and the purpose of evolution is to raise every human being to the sublime degree of a Master Christ." How would a Mason go about becoming a Christ? What is the technique of initiation? The Masonic initiation by W.L. Wilmshurst contains a clue. This is page 45. For those upon the path to real initiation, meditation is essential. We run into the term soul architecture in the writings of Wilmshurst. He uses it to embody initiation repeated over time. Initiation always occurs when the physical body is in a state of trance or sleep, and when the temporarily liberated consciousness has been transferred to a higher level. Further down on the page he writes, "Yet in the actual experience of soul architecture, initiation succeeds initiation upon increasingly higher levels of the ladder as the individual becomes correspondingly ripe for them, able to bear their strain and assimilate their revelations." This is page 54 of the Masonic initiation. "Initiation has no other end than this, conscious union between the individual soul and the universal divine spirit." So we can summarize the initiation process at this point. Initiation is a process in which a Mason goes into trance by passive meditation and attains conscious union. That is, he establishes communications with the Masonic God. By attaining conscious union, he becomes a Christ. The process of initiation reoccurs over months and years, and after each conscious union with the Masonic God, he has new understandings about himself and about the God. The process is evolutionary. The Mason evolves into a God himself. One Mason I talked to told me that Masonic initiation wasn't taught in this country. Of course, there is no way that a Mason would admit to this unless he was going to repent. Is Masonic initiation known in the United States? Well, all of the authors we have consulted on the subject are Americans, except for Wilmshurst. He was English. Let's take a look at an official publication of the Scottish Rite. Recently, they changed the name to the Scottish Rite Journal because of all the exposure the New Age was receiving. This is the title page for the October 1981 issue of the New Age. And if we look down further at the bottom of the page, we'll see that it is an official publication of the Supreme Council 33rd Degree, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry of the Southern Jurisdiction. So clearly this is an official publication. And on page 30, there's an article on initiation. This is the beginning of the article, which begins on page 30. Initiation, one step towards infinity. The initiate no doubt experienced an elevation of consciousness which profoundly affected modes of thought, word, and deed in his life. It was more likely akin to the born-again experience of evangelical Christianity, but of a more universal cosmic nature. Notice that they talk about an elevation of consciousness, a born-again experience, but of a cosmic nature. If we were not familiar with some of the terminology of the secret doctrine, we wouldn't have any idea what they are talking about. But to those who are aware, the meaning is clear. Many Masonic writings have things going on different levels, and only those that are aware of the doctrines understand. This is the altar in the House of the Temple in Washington. Notice that initiation is carved in the floor. It's also carved in the walls near the ceiling. Some of the snakes which adorn the House of the Temple can be seen at the top of the photograph. This book, Ancient Operative Masonry, has a statement on the Masonic teachings concerning Christ, which is about as clear as any I've seen. This was written by S.R. Parchment. It's being used only as a supporting document here. No new information is added. Parchment was both a Mason and a Rosicrucian. We will later see that there is a close relationship between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. The text that we're interested in is on page 35, but I wanted to show you that this was Ancient Operative Masonry. The title is on the top of page 34, so we just swing over to page 35 here. Chapter heading is Egyptian Masonry here. We read, "The lost word is the Christ within, to which the mystic Mason looks for redemption." Further down on the page, "In the early church, as in the secret doctrine, there was not a personal Christ for the whole world, but a potential Christ in every living being. Yea, the mystic, while investigating the intangible realms, beholds potential Christs in the atoms which compose the universe. Hence, Masons believe in the architect of the universe, but positively not in Jesus the man as the only Son of God." I think Parchment says it about as clearly as anyone. I'd like to summarize the secret doctrine at this time. There is not one Christ for the whole world, but a potential Christ in each man. It is far more important to become a Christ than it is to believe that Jesus was a Christ. Each man works out his own salvation by becoming his own Savior. If a man doesn't save himself, he won't be saved. Since each man can become a Christ himself, they have no use for the cleansing blood of Jesus Christ. This summarizes the actual process of salvation. Through the process of Masonic initiation, man may attain conscious union with the God of Freemasonry. The process of Masonic initiation is not a ceremony, but is an internal process which occurs while the individual is in trance. When conscious union is attained, the lost word is found. The man becomes a Christ and thus becomes a God himself. What is the true nature of the Masonic Lodge? What type of organization is it? I've asked this question several times before, and I imagine your opinion is changing as time goes on. I've hesitated to call Masonry a religion because most Masons will hotly deny it. We are going to look at some of what the Masonic authors have to say about the nature of the Lodge. This is Morals and Dogma. It, of course, was written by Albert Pike and published by the authority of the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree. We'll take a look at what he says about Freemasonry and the nature of it. Pike writes on page 213, "Every Masonic Lodge is a temple of religion, and its teachings are instruction in religion." Certainly the material we've been looking at is instruction in religion. This is a comprehensive view of Freemasonry by Henry Wilson, Coyle, 33rd Degree. Coyle is a highly respected Mason. He wrote this book, and he also wrote Coyle's Masonic Encyclopedia. So he is a well-recognized authority. There's a portrait of Coyle, which appears on the back cover of the book. It also notes that he's an attorney, or was an attorney. Here's the title page. We notice that he's the chairman of the Committee on Masonic Information for the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of California. Looking down at the bottom, we notice that McCoy Publishing and Masonic Supply publishes this book, and they're the leading Masonic publisher. Let's see what Coyle's opinion about Masonry as a religion is. He says to call Masonry not religion, but religious, merely substitutes an adjective for a noun, both meaning the same thing. It is absurd as saying that a certain individual has no intellect, but is intellectual, or that he has no wealth, but is wealthy. Conversations on Freemasonry is another book that Henry Wilson Coyle wrote, and we can see down at the bottom that it also was published by McCoy Publishing and Masonic Supply Company. This is the beginning of Chapter 5. It starts on page 163. And Coyle writes, Masonic writers have differed. Mackey called Freemasonry a religion. Pike dissented. Pike argued that one could not hold two religions at the same time, and hence a Christian, a Jew, or a Mohammedan who retained his religion could not accept Masonry also as a religion. Therefore, he said, Masonry could not be a religion. Well, that's rather absurd logic. Who is the God of Freemasonry? How can we be sure of his true identity? Let's take a look at the Kentucky Monitor. This is page 116. They have some text on the all-seeing eye, which is the eye of Osiris. In most of the ancient languages of Asia, eye and sun are expressed by the same word, and the ancient Egyptians hieroglyphically represented their principal deity, the sun god Osiris, by the figure of an open eye. In like manner, Masons have emblematically represented the omniscience of the great architect of the universe. This is Mackey's Revised Encyclopedia. It's one of the most popular Masonic encyclopedias ever written. Mackey is one of the most widely respected Masonic authorities. There are various editions of this encyclopedia, and the page numbers are different in the various versions. So if you look up some in the material, go by the alphabetical listing of the topics rather than the page number. Here's the title page, Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, and it is in fact written by Albert G. Mackey. Here's a portrait of Mackey, so you can get an idea what he looked like. This is the article on Bell, which appears on page 130 of this particular edition of Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Bell, spelled B-E-L, is usually pronounced Bell, but both Strong in his Hebrew dictionary and Fariabin in his prefer to say Baal. The word is probably the contracted form of some other Hebrew word, commonly pronounced Baal and spelled B-A-A-L, and he was worshipped by the Babylonians as their chief deity. At the top of the next column, we read that Baal signifies Lord or Master. Alone, the word applies to the sun god. With Jah and On, it has been introduced into the Royal Arch system as a representative of the Tetragrammaton. In the Royal Arch degree, that's part of the York Rite, the secret name of God is supposedly revealed. It is Jebulon. Jah stands for Jehovah, Bull stands for Baal, and On is a corruption of Osiris. The god of the Masonic Lodge is identified with Baal and Osiris. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, would not be pleased to be associated with them. We see that Masonry apparently worships several gods. Osiris and Baal are among them. There is one God which they refuse to worship, and that is Jesus. I'm going to show you some text on page 65 of The Lost Keys of Freemasonry by Manly Palmer Hall. Hall writes, "The true Mason is not creed-bound. He realizes with the divine illumination of his lodge that as a Mason his religion must be universal. Christ, Buddha, or Mohammed, the name means little, for he recognizes only the light and not the bearer. He worships at every shrine, bows before every altar, whether in temple, mosque, or cathedral, realizing with his truer understanding the oneness of all spiritual truth. So we see that the true Mason is an idolater. He worships any god at any altar. We can be certain that the God which Masons have conscious union with is not God the Father because of what Jesus said. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Paul wrote this to the Corinthians, But to us there is but one God, the Father, in whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Now it is clear that Masons do not attain conscious union with their God through Jesus because they deny that he is the one true Christ. From the writings of John, we can be certain that the God of the Bible is not the Masonic God. This is one of the scriptural definitions for Antichrist. Who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father. But he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. John tells us that he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ is Antichrist. Masonry teaches that Jesus was born an ordinary man and that he became a Christ later on. He did not come as Christ in the flesh. Let's take a look at the meaning of Masonry by Lynn Perkins. Page 53, the beginning of chapter 5, which is titled Hiram, Christic Hero of Masonry. We read, Jesus of Nazareth had attained a level of consciousness of perfection that has been called by various names: cosmic consciousness, soul regeneration, philosophic initiation, spiritual illumination, Brahmic splendor, Christ consciousness. Notice that Perkins maintains that Jesus attained a level of consciousness, Christ consciousness. He was not born a Christ. He became a Christ later on. The Christ state is something he attained. We know from the writings of John that the spirit of Masonry is Antichrist. John wrote, And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world. John also wrote, For many deceivers are entered into the world, who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist. So according to the biblical definition of Antichrist, the spirit of Masonry is Antichrist. Is there anything in Masonic writings which would lead us to believe that Satan or Lucifer is the god of Freemasonry? We will fully answer that question in Part 2 with an in-depth look at Masonic writings regarding that issue. Or is the god of Masonry? We're going to look at what Masonic writers say about the god of Freemasonry. This book is Ancient Mysteries in Modern Masonry by the Reverend Charles H. Vail. We saw this book in Part 1, and we're going to take a look at some of the other things that are in it. This is page 26, and we're going to look at text that's further down on the page. And it reads, In all of the initiations and mysteries, the gods exhibit many forms of themselves and appear in a variety of shapes, and sometimes, indeed, a formless light of themselves is held forth to the view. Sometimes this light is according to a human form, and sometimes it proceeds into a different shape. Notice that Vail, who is quoting Taylor, states that the gods sometimes appear as a formless light. Before we take a look at the writings of Swinburne Clymer, we need to know something about Manicheans. This is from Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Manicheans, also termed Gnostics, it's a sect taking its rise in the middle of the 3rd century whose belief was in two eternal principles of good and evil. They derived their name from Manus. Now, Manus is spelled several different ways in the literature of Freemasonry. I want you to notice that they believed in two eternal principles of good and evil. These forces were said to be constantly opposed to one another. Their god or gods had two natures. One nature was good, the other nature was evil. We're going to take a look at the writings of Swinburne Clymer. This is the Mysticism of Masonry. And we can see that it's written by R. Swinburne Clymer, M.D. Manisus, spelled M-A-N-I-S-I-S, was the leader of a sect of Gnostics who were known as Manicheans, according to Albert Pike. This is on page 565. Now, Swinburne Clymer wrote in the Mysticism of Masonry on page 19, "The mysteries have now, as throughout the long ages past, for their foundation the existence of God as Jehovah Adonai, the Father of Light." We've moved to page 52 of the Mysticism of Masonry. And Clymer writes, "This Jehovah was the avenging side of the Creator and is not the Jehovah Adonai, the Father of Light of the New Age, who is also the Father of the multitudes and the God of Manisus." Further down the page he writes, "Jehovah, the jealous God." The God of the Bible is a jealous God. This is page 29 of the Mysticism of Masonry by Clymer, and Clymer writes, "And Jehovah Adonai, that is to say, the Father of Light, spoke unto his messenger Manisus, saying, I will appear to thee in the image of light, for did I not promise those who have gone before thee that the woman clothed with the sun should be with them? And I now establish a covenant with thee, and bind my laws to a fulfillment of this covenant, that all of my children who will obey the laws shall be blessed and cheered when in misfortune or sorrow, for I shall appear to them in the fire as an angel of light." It is clear from the writings of Vail and Clymer that the God of Masonry appears as a formless light or as an angel of light. This is not a direct admission that Lucifer is the God of the Lodge. However, let's see how Paul would interpret these Masonic writings. Paul warned us that Satan could appear as an angel of light. And he wrote to the Corinthians, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." This booklet is called The House of the Temple of the Supreme Council. It's a booklet that shows a lot about the building where the 33rd degree right is conferred in Washington, D.C. And I want to show you a little bit about Albert Pike in it. This is what's known as the Albert Pike Room. And I'm going to read the text that's at the right on the next page in the booklet. It says, "Lawyer, linguist, teacher, scholar, frontiersman, editor, journalist, nationally known poet, internationally known philosopher, a mind of almost unimaginable intellectual scope, a man of unlimited compassion, illustrious brother Albert Pike, Grand Commander of the Mother Jurisdiction from 1859 to 1891, is remembered and honored in this room. Brother Pike used his vast talents to research and write the rituals, making them eloquent, symbolic representations of our rights history and philosophy. A number of his handwritten manuscripts and the quill pen he fashioned himself are on display in the Pike Room. Also on display is a miniature model of a monument honoring Grand Commander Pike. The original life-size monument is located on Indiana Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C., between the Municipal Center and the Department of Labor building. Albert Pike remains today an inspiration for Masons everywhere. His great book, Morals and Dogma, endures as the most complete exposition of Scottish Rite philosophy. He will always be remembered and revered as the master builder of the Scottish Rite.